I'm speaking with Khaled Abu Toameh. He is an Arab journalist and senior Palestinian affairs writer for the Jerusalem Post. He's reported from the West Bank and Gaza Strip for more than 20 years for both Israeli and Palestinian publications. He also acts as a producer for television news programs in both Europe and the U.S. and currently produces for NBC and other major networks. He has a bachelor's degree in English literature from Hebrew University and currently lives in Jerusalem. Khaled, let's talk about the new Palestinian unity government between Hamas and Fatah. Saudi Arabia brokered the deal. What does this new government mean for the Middle East?
Well, the question is, what does it mean for the Palestinians first? As you know, about more than a year ago, we had a free and democratic election over there. And Hamas won the election. And ever since then, we've had a power struggle between the guys who lost the election and the guys who won the election. We've basically had the PLO saying, what's going on here? Give it back to us. It's ours. Who are you, Hamas, to come and take it? We've had it for 40 years. And so what if you want it in a free and democratic election? And Hamas saying, no, we're not going to give up. Now, the guys who lost the election have been supported by the United States of America and Europe. The same parties that demanded a free and democratic election have been trying over the past year to bring down the democratically elected government. So they failed. They failed through financial sanctions. They failed through violence. They failed through an international boycott of the Hamas government. So the name of the game is, if you can't beat them, join them. They eventually decide to join hands, Fatah and Hamas, because they need the money. And they're both saying it. We need the money of the international community. The Palestinians have been without money for the past year, or ever since Hamas came to power.
So in this new government, which is the more dominant force, Hamas or Fatah?
That's a very good question. As someone who lives there and as someone who has been covering it, I still don't know. But there are some things we have to point out. The unity government is led by Hamas. The unity government's survival depends on the goodwill of the Hamas-dominated Palestinian parliament. So I'm afraid that what we're going to see is the continuation of the power struggle between Fatah and Hamas, even while they're sitting inside the government.
And it's been a shooting conflict. A lot of people have gotten killed in this, what some people have described as being close to a civil war.
Yes, I covered the fighting that happened over there. Over 140 Palestinians were killed in the past 4 months in internal fighting. Actually, the number of Palestinians killed in internal fighting in 2006 was higher than the number of Palestinians killed in clashes with the Israelis. And this is something unprecedented. The violence we had there, you correctly said that it was something like civil war. I always say that it's not civil war because no war can be civil anyway, but it was a clash between bad guys and bad guys. It wasn't a clash between good guys and bad guys.
Is it between bad guys and worse guys?
Everything's relative. I don't see much of a difference, to tell you the truth, between the guys who lost the election and the guys who won the election. On the one hand, we have corrupt, secular PLO leaders who failed their people and who were actually voted out for corruption, for embezzlement, for doing all the wrong things, for embezzling $6.5 billion that were poured on the Palestinians between 1993 and 2001.
Well, what's the platform of the new government? What principles have they agreed to?
That's another good question, because as someone who has read the platform in Arabic, I can still say that I'm confused. I don't know what they want. The platform of the unity government was drafted in such a way so as to appease everyone, to appease Hamas and to appease Fatah and to appease the Americans and to appease the Arabs. And
you mean it's meant to be confusing?
Yes, deliberately.
Can you penetrate to the core and figure out what it's really saying?
It's saying yes and no. It's saying, it's open for wide interpretation. For example, does the platform meet the 3 conditions of the quartet?
And those conditions are?
Renouncing violence, recognizing Israel, and honoring or abiding by previous agreements. Now, Arabic is a very rich language, and it can also be very complicated, and one word can have many meanings. So the way I understand it is that in this document, the political platform does not meet even half of these demands. Does it recognize Israel's right to exist? No. At least not explicitly. Does it renounce violence? Absolutely not. On the contrary, it talks about pursuing the resistance. What is the resistance over there? The resistance is not holding a placard and stopping and standing in downtown Gaza and chanting peacefully, down with the occupation. Resistance over there means suicide bombings, drive-by shootings, and death, violence, a lot of violence, rockets, missiles. So does it talk about abiding by previous agreements? No. There's a play of words over there. Hamas is saying we're prepared to respect the previous agreements. And what does respect mean? I asked many Hamas leaders over there, what do you mean when you say that you're going to respect the previous agreements that were signed between the PLO and Israel, including the Oslo Accord? They said, well, that means we are prepared to accept them as an established fact only.
So does this mean that this is essentially a war government whose primary purpose is to conduct war against Israel?
Not necessarily. This is a government whose primary purpose is to get money, to persuade the international community to resume pouring billions of dollars on the Palestinians.
Does it look like that's going to happen? Does it look like this new unity government is going to reopen the faucets of Western aid?
Absolutely. Absolutely, it does. I mean, I see the Russians and even some Americans rushing to embrace this new government under the pretext that this is a new government, it's a peace government, everything is okay, and let's start pouring them billions again. I mean, within...
Why are they saying it's a peace government when you just said that they have not agreed to recognize Israel's right to exist or cease violence against it?
Because as I said, it's open for interpretation. If you ask members of the new government, do you recognize Israel's right to exist? They say yes. There is an implicit recognition. The fact that we accept all United Nations resolutions, the fact that we accept all the Arab Summit resolutions means that, we recognize Israel's right to exist. But the word Israel is not even mentioned once in this document. Israel is referred to as the occupation.
Now, for decades, all of these politicians and diplomats have been working on the two-state solution. So what does this new government say about the two-state solution?
Nothing. It doesn't talk
So,
about
so they're not
two-state
interested
solution.
in the two-state solution, it sounds like.
It says nothing about the two-state solution. There's no reference at all. Even in the speeches that Mahmoud Abbas, the president, and Ismail Haniyeh, the prime minister, delivered in the inauguration ceremony, there's no reference to the future borders or to peace. I didn't hear any of them say, it's time to recognize Israel. I didn't hear any of them say it's time to renounce violence and terrorism. I didn't.
So does this mean that the peace process, which so many people have worked on, is essentially at the end of the road? There's no place to go from here, that this is a military conflict that can only be resolved militarily?
The peace process died in September 2000 when the Intifada was launched, because this Intifada undid everything. It cancelled, it trampled on the peace, on the Oslo Accords. This Intifada destroyed relations not only between Jews and Palestinians, but also between Jews and Israeli Arabs. This Intifada destroyed all prospects of achieving peace. This Intifada has raised an entire generation of Palestinians on the notion of martyrdom and jihad and suicide bombings.
Now, what is really the core of this conflict? Some people say it's about land. If only they had land, there would be peace. Some say it's about improving the living standards of the Palestinians. What is the real core? What's driving this whole conflict, really, from the Palestinian side?
Well, I think it's not only from the Palestinian side, but also from the Arab side. I think there's still a problem in the Arab and Muslim world with accepting or with coming to terms with Israel's right to exist in that part of the world, and that is the core of the problem. It's no longer a territorial dispute. If it was about territory, it could have been resolved a long time ago, because today Israel is prepared to give up most of the 1967 territories and withdraw and give the Palestinians a state. So we see actually in the past 5 or maybe 10 years that this conflict has shifted from a political and national conflict to a religious conflict. It's become Islam versus Jews over there, and that's what it's really about. It's about Israel's very existence. That is the real problem that most Arabs and most Muslims have. The perception remains on the Arab and Muslim street that the Jews came there, stole the land, kicked the Arabs and Muslims out, and the Arabs and Muslims are entitled to go back to their homeland. That's how it's seen.
And what would it take for Israel to overcome this?
It's not only a problem of Israel. I think it's a problem of the international community also. The only way to change this perception on the Arab street is through education. And I don't see education taking a right turn in the Arab world.
Well, education is very important. Some people say that if you want to know what people really believe, look at what they teach their own children. So in Palestinian schools, what do they teach their children about Israel and about Jews?
Well, for many years, the message coming out of the Palestinian textbooks was negative. There was nothing positive about it. Actually, Arafat took the money of the international community. He took money from the Americans and the Europeans, and he printed textbooks that called the Americans and the Jews infidels and called for jihad. So your money actually helped, Arafat call for killing Americans and the Europeans. This was the message. This is what happens when you pour money or billions of dollars on a regime without demanding transparency and accountability, without demanding anything in return. So yes, the message was very negative. It didn't come from Hamas. It came from the PLO. The same Arafat who was visiting the White House returned home at the end of the day and called for, through the mosques and through the newspapers, he called for the destruction of the White House, and he even prayed that at one prayer, at one event, he called, or his mufti, called for God to turn the White House into a black house, a house of mourning. And this was like 2 or 3 months before 9/11.
Now, some people say that if Israel were only to make enough concessions, it could have peace. In your opinion, is there anything that Israel could offer to the Palestinians that if they offered it, they would say, well, the conflict is over, we're satisfied now, we have what we want, or is this just life and death, period?
But look at the situation today. Israel left the Gaza Strip. Did you see one Palestinian celebrating in the streets and saying, thank you, Israel? Israel actually left to the 1967 border. Israel's not there.
Now,
Israel's begging the Palestinians, come and take the West Bank. Come and take 90% or 80% of the West Bank. There's no partner out there.
Do the Palestinians get much military aid from other Arab or Muslim powers such as Iran and Egypt and Syria? Are they getting a lot of outside support?
Well, weapons are coming from, first of all, they're coming every day, whether it's through underground tunnels or through the border with Egypt. There's a lot of smuggling happening over there. Officially, the Palestinian Authority does not receive weapons from any Arab party. But unofficially, the smuggling of weapons is really frightening. Tons of weapons are being smuggled into the Palestinian areas, especially ever since Israel abandoned control over the Rafah border with Egypt. And the flow of this weapon is going to bring us the third war over there, the third intifada.
Now, do you think that the Palestinian areas pose a major strategic threat to Israel right now, or are rapidly becoming a major strategic threat to the point that it's going to be really hard for the Israeli army to reassert its control if it has to?
Well, look what's happening in Gaza. I mean, the Israelis want to go into Gaza, but they're thinking twice and thinking 3 times before they go in. I believe that eventually they'll have to go in because of what's happening there. We have long-range missiles coming in. We have anti-aircraft missiles. We have Al-Qaeda moving into Gaza. So if it's not the Israelis, someone will have to go in and clean the mess over there.
Are the Palestinians acting as kind of proxies for other powers, or is all this hatred and all this violence really coming from them themselves?
I can't really say that, the Palestinians are affected by this party or that party in the Arab world. I can say that on the Palestinian street there is no love for Israel and America and the West. There's a lot of hatred, anti-American sentiments and anti-Jewish sentiments are very high on the Palestinian street. I see Palestinian street being more and more radicalized over the last few years, and that is very, very worrying. I see, Hamas did not come to power out of the blue, out of a void. It's a process that's happening over there.
So now where do we go from here? I mean, it sounds like Hamas is not going to change. We hear a lot of talk in the West. When Hamas accepts Israel, there will be peace. When they change, there will be peace. Do we come to a point where we say, they're not going to change, they're committed to war, we have to accept that reality and deal with it?
Well, Hamas is not going to change in the sense that if anyone thinks Hamas will one day recognize Israel, that's not going to happen. Or if anyone thinks that Hamas will wake up in the morning and call on its supporters to sing Hatikvah in the morning, that's also not going to happen. Hamas will never change its ideology, because if it changes its ideology, it loses its legitimacy to exist. And its ideology is based on the fact that what they see as a fact, which is that Palestine is Muslim-owned and you cannot give it to non-Muslims, that the Jews have no right to be there, basically. So how can they now come and tell their own supporters, no, the Jews do have a right? And they have quotes from the Quran and all that. So when it's religious fundamentalism, it's very difficult to change them. Hamas is not the PLO that they can change. And you know what? Hamas is being honest. Hamas is saying, sorry folks, we're not prepared to accept Israel. Why are we putting pressure on them? Why are we asking them just to say 3 sentences and everything will be okay? If they say 3 sentences, does that mean they've become a Peace Now movement?
Now, as far as Muslim ownership, not all Palestinian Arabs are Muslims. Some are Christians. What's the situation of Christian Arabs in the Palestinian territories, say, compared to what it was when Israel operated those territories?
Well, the conditions of the Christians is awful over there. Their number is dwindling rapidly. In the 50s and 60s, the percentage of Christians living in Bethlehem and its surroundings was over 80%. Today, the Christians constitute only 14% in the Bethlehem area. They're running away. Most of them, they've been running away ever since the Palestinian Authority came about in 1994. All this talk about, it's the occupation's fault is a bit exaggerated. There's a lot of persecution over there. I recently interviewed many Christians over there, and I even did a story for a number of TV networks about how local Muslim gangs, and I'm a Muslim, and I'm ashamed even to say this, how local Muslim gangs were stealing the lands of the Christians and how they were terrorizing them, and. So there is a problem. I mean, we can't, say that the Muslims are 100% responsible for the misery of the Christians. Okay, Israel does bear some kind of responsibility, but I think most of the blame goes on the local Muslim population over there.
If somebody were actually to give the Palestinians a state of their own, do you think they would be viable? There are usually certain criteria that people have to meet to be a state. They need a viable economic infrastructure, a civil society, rule of law, and all those things. Do you think that the Palestinians would be capable of managing the state if somebody were to give them one?
Well, from what we've seen so far, no. The Palestinians have even proven, and they even say it. They say it. We have proven that we don't deserve a state. The Palestinians, instead of forming or establishing civil institutions and civil society, they established what I call a uniform culture. Everyone is armed. There are too many militias on the streets. There's a breakdown of law and order. The Palestinian areas are controlled today by militias and gangs and clans and security forces. I don't know. I go to Ramallah. I don't know who's in control over there. It's no longer a matter of economy as much as it's a matter of good governance. We don't have a proper government over there. There's no proper institutions. Nothing is functioning.
And once these feuds get started, it might be easier to start a feud than to end one.
The Palestinians are not prepared. Look, we missed an opportunity. The Palestinians did have a chance to prove that they are capable of building a state. Between 1993 and 2001, the international community, as I said, they poured $6.5 billion on Yasser Arafat. With this money, he could have done a lot. He could have built hospitals and schools and roads, and he could have provided jobs for the Palestinians. This would have had a moderating effect on the Palestinians had he invested for the welfare of the people. But when you pour money on someone and you don't ask him, what are you doing with the money will go to support the shopping sprees of a certain lady sitting in Paris, or it will go down the drain. And this is it.
Or fund armaments.
Yeah, I mean, for Arafat it was more important to smuggle a weapons ship, Karine A. I mean, he paid $50 million to smuggle that ship when he knows that, this money is needed by the refugees.
So does that mean that the Palestinian leaders are not really motivated by a desire to help ordinary people? Their main goal is to destroy Israel, to drive the Jews into the sea, and Palestinians, they could care less about them.
Look, all I can tell you is that, I don't know what their main goal is. I mean, these are very selfish people who only care about themselves. Both Hamas and Fatah have failed their people. One is saying, I don't want to destroy Israel. At least they're saying it in English. And the other one is saying in Arabic, I want to destroy Israel. That's not the problem, I think, because they're both bad. I think the real problem is that we should try, as an international community, to search for good leaders, the good guys. Not all the Palestinians, fortunately, are Hamas, and not all the Palestinians are Fatah. We need to help the Palestinians build proper institutions. We need to put pressure on the Palestinians to end this anarchy and lawlessness, this show What we have in the Palestinian areas is the mafia.
But how can the good people gain control if the bad people are still there? If a Palestinian were to stand in the public square in Gaza and say, you know, I don't think the Jews are so bad, I think we should make peace with them, I don't think that would be very safe.
Yes, if I stand in Ramallah today and I talk about corruption and anarchy, I'll be shot. You know by who? By the Palestinian security forces that are funded and trained by the United States of America. So if you want us to emerge, and if you want to see young and new leaders in the Palestinian areas, you have to stop supporting the bad guys.
Let's talk about the media a little bit, because you're in media. You've worked for the media both in Israel and the Palestinian territories. How do you compare the experience as far as your ability to report honestly on the facts as you see them?
Well, you know, I must admit that there are almost no restrictions on the movement in the West Bank and Gaza for me as a journalist over there. I mean, we're free to go anywhere we want. The question is, do we feel safe when we go to the Palestinian areas? And no, we don't feel safe because people over there, they don't accept criticism. They don't accept independent reporting. They could be hostile to anyone who reports negatively on the Palestinians or on the Palestinian leadership.
So have you ever felt threatened there? Because you filed many stories that are not especially flattering to the Palestinian leadership.
Yes, of course. I've even received death threats. But I still go back there. You know why? Because I'm not lying. I'm telling the truth. I'll be more concerned and more afraid if I were lying. But I show up in Ramallah every day, despite what I write. And people, the only complaints I hear is, you know, Khaled, what you reported today is 100% accurate and true, but you shouldn't have reported it. Now, this type of criticism does not scare me.
Are there any stories in the Palestinian territories that even you would feel were too hot to handle, that you wouldn't dare cover?
Well, you know, for me, there is no taboo. I've crossed all the lines. I've done stories about honor killings. I've done stories about killings of so-called collaborators. I've touched on most of the very sensitive issues that both foreigners and Palestinians refuse to deal with. And I believe, you know, this is our job there as a reporter, to show everything. I'm not being selective. I'm not saying let's focus on one side and forget the other. I think it's the job of a reporter to dig and dig and dig until he reaches the truth.
Now, some people complain that the Western press slants too much in favor of the Palestinians. They give too much credence to Palestinian claims, not enough credence to Israeli claims. First of all, do you think that this is in fact the case, that they grant too much credibility to the Palestinian side?
You know, I think the attitude of the foreign media towards Israel has slightly improved over the past 6 years, largely thanks to the Palestinian terror campaign that was waged against Israel, and also thanks to 9/11, because it changed the views of many people in the West. Many people woke up and said, you know, suicide bombings are bad, and it's affecting us in Europe, and they've seen, you know, the Muslim revolt in Europe happening and all that. So foreign journalists are more open, and they can really understand today. The problem we have over there is that many of the foreign journalists still look at this conflict and say, in this conflict there are the good guys and the bad guys. And the good guys are the Palestinians, and the bad guys are the Israelis. And it's very difficult to persuade people to change this perception, unless, you know,
And why are the good guys the Palestinians?
Because they're seen as the people living under occupation, and they are the underdog, and they are the victims, and the Jews are the oppressors. Israel is strong, and the foreign journalists like to side always with the weak side. That's simple. That's how simple it is. It's very simple. That's how I see it. And also, you know, for many of these foreign journalists, it's in to side with the victims. You're not supposed to side with the oppressors. Otherwise, you won't be a liberal.
Now, let's say you have a Western journalist who's kind of neutral in the conflict. He just wants to report the facts. Does he have problems doing that from the Palestinian territories? Are there forces that make it more difficult for him to get the facts or to report them, even if he wants to?
Absolutely. I mean, today, 90 or maybe 100% of the foreign journalists don't go into Gaza anymore. And they have to rely on local fixers and stringers. And many of these local fixers and stringers and consultants are 100% affiliated with Fatah or Hamas.
So they're relying for news on the Palestinian leadership itself?
No, I mean, whether it's Fatah or Hamas, and this is very bad. because foreign journalists are afraid because they're being kidnapped and they're being killed and they're being harassed in the Palestinian areas, so they have to be very careful. I'm very worried because if you don't have foreign journalists going to these areas, they'll never be able to understand. You can't just sit in your office in Jerusalem or in Herzliya and report on what's happening in Gaza on the basis of what someone tells you. There's not a way to report.
What about Palestinian reporters themselves, not foreigners? Can things they write be trusted at all?
Well, first of all, they can't write. I mean, they're not free. The question is, where can they write? We have 3 major Palestinian newspapers, and they're all affiliated, or they're all funded by the PLO. They all belong to the Palestinian Authority. Of course, you can write things if you want to say, if you have good things to say about the Palestinian Authority. Otherwise, you cannot write.
So there's no independent press there.
There are private TV stations, and private radio stations, but they're not independent. There's a difference between being private and affiliated. They're all affiliated with either Hamas or Fatah, and there's no room for self-criticism over there, even in these private TV stations, because the editors themselves practice self-censorship, whether it's out of fear or out of ideology.
Now, you work in the Israeli media. Do you think that the Israeli media does a good enough job of defending Israel when it's attacked? There's a lot of slander directed against Israel. There are many accusations that are continually raised. Does the Jewish press do any kind of good job of countering this?
You know, sometimes if you read the Haaretz, you will feel that you're reading a Palestinian newspaper.
I've had that experience.
Actually, most of the articles printed in Haaretz are translated and reprinted in the Palestinian media because...
and Haaretz, for the benefit of our viewers, is a left-wing Israeli newspaper.
Yes. So, you know, I have many reservations about the way the Israeli media functions over there. I think in the last 10 or 15 years, we've seen a deterioration of ethical standards in the Israeli media. And it started with the Oslo process, when the Israeli media blindly supported the Oslo process and refused to ask questions. And it continued with unilateral disengagement, when again the Israeli media refused to raise any questions about, you know, whether it's a good step or a bad step. And later, most of the prominent Israeli journalists and editors even admitted that, you know, we made a mistake, we didn't ask enough questions, because we had an agenda. We supported the Oslo Accords, we supported Yasser Arafat, we supported unilateral disengagement, and perhaps if we had asked more difficult questions, we would have been able to change the situation.
So what do you think we're going to be maybe 10 years down the road? Do you still think it's going to be a standoff, or is one side going to defeat the other?
No, you can't defeat. No, there's no winner or loser in this conflict. The way we should look at it is like this. Between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, we have 5 million Jews and 4.5 million Arabs, if you also include the Israeli Arabs. And we all live on top of each other and next to each other and across the street from each other. I think the real problem over there is that there is no room for 2 states. The land is so small that it just can't be divided. No wall or fence is ever going to be able to divide it. That is the essence of the problem over there. That is the core of the problem, that no one wants to admit that you can't actually establish a Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, not only because the West Bank and Gaza don't have any territorial link between them, but also because these areas are very small. There's no economy. A Palestinian state cannot be viable. There's nothing over there, so it's just not going to work, and that is a tragedy.
So do you think there is any peaceful negotiated solution possible, or is that, you know, barking?
The word peace, you know, we have to forget about it, at least for a couple of generations. But what we should focus on now is managing the conflict. The question should be, how do we prevent violence over there? How do we persuade the Palestinians to establish good governance and dismantle all these militias and accept Israel? This can be done through education and through pressure from the international community. As I said before, the Palestinians are 100% dependent on foreign aid. And when they come and ask you for money, it's your right as an international community to demand something in return. You say, fine, I'm going to give you $20 million. Can I please see a free media in Palestine? Ask for something, you might get it. If you don't ask, you'll never get it. So we should search for ways to manage the conflict by keeping, you know, the flame very low, by preventing violence, by persuading both sides that violence does not pay, this is the only way to do it.